When I say the name Chris Paul, what comes to your mind? Maybe you think he's a choker, CP0 rings, with a dazzling 2 decades of playoff disappointments on his resume. Maybe you think of him as a whiner, a living, breathing, grown man tattletale, somebody who bends the rules or even qualifies as a dirty player. Perhaps you think of Rajon Rondo. And if that's where your mind goes, to any of those places, well, unfortunately, I wouldn't be surprised, but that would be a tremendous disservice to the most complete and perhaps the most misunderstood point guard in NBA history. CP3 earned the title of point god over a career of remarkably consistent brilliance. He's been a defensive dynamo, a playmaking savant, a surgical scorer, and at every stop throughout his exceptionally long run as a star, had a historically transformative impact on winning. But how has he done it? Well, much of Paul's genius has always come out of the pick and roll, where he has been manipulating defenses expertly for nearly 2 decades. As is the case with several legendary passers who didn't score at the highest volume, but did so with excellent efficiency, like Steve Nash or Magic Johnson, Paul's lethal scoring is underrated and just as key to his pick and roll genius as his passing. Paul was built to destroy drop coverage in particular. As one of the greatest intermediate shot makers ever, he's made 47% of his career mid-range attempts, an outstanding number with an incredible ability to create clean looks from that range at his size. Paul could threaten the defense downhill with his quickness before hopping back into a mid-range jumper, or, especially in his older years, methodically snake his way to the same shot that always felt automatic. Paul's deceleration, masterful ball handling, and ability to snatch and step back has made this shot impossible for defenses to take away, and I don't think anybody has ever tormented bigs more out of pick and roll and off switches. Paul has always played at such a calm pace, more than happy to force the big to switch, then dribble back out to the perimeter and make the poor fellow dance, stopping on a dime at will at his spot. Paul also has one of the best floaters in league history, having made 55% of them in his career, with a special ability in his younger years to adjust midair and hit leaning floaters from tough angles. These are the most important shots against drop coverage, which is designed to take away the rim, and CP3 is historically great at them. And he's of course a historically great passer, which has always benefited his scoring as well. Look as he fakes the laydown pass here to free up the runner for himself. Paul is such an exceptional passer that you have to try to play him honestly, lest he dissect you. At the same time, Paul's scoring has enabled him to create so many great looks for teammates over the years. Send 2 to the ball, and he is a true master of the pocket pass. He could use his quickness to get into the teeth of the defense and dissect them with a laydown or kickout pass, and he is probably the most accurate lob passer ever, having spoon-fed so many bigs out of pick and roll and made all their lives infinitely easier. And if the defense was overly shifted to the strong side, he could fire a skip pass. CP3 doesn't have the size of some of the modern great playmakers like LeBron or Luka, which allows them to utilize certain passing angles that Paul simply can't, nor has he had the audacity of a Magic or Nash or Jokic, but I don't think anybody has ever more surgically controlled the game, especially out of pick and roll. For 15 straight years, from 2008 to 2022, Paul created with at least 84th percentile efficiency out of pick and roll every single season. A remarkable testament to the high shot quality he inevitably created for himself and others for close to 2 decades. Paul's career assist to turnover ratio of 9.4 to 2.3 is also comical, and this doesn't make him the perfect passer. A handful of players have created more value than Paul by taking more chances and therefore hitting more home runs and notching some more turnovers, but that number speaks to Paul's masterful control. He was never sped up, never panicked, always picking apart the defense at his own pace. Paul is also one of the all-time great ball handlers, which he used to perplex defenses even further. Look at him sell this in and out dribble hard to send the defender levitating around a screen that Paul will never even use. Here, he perfectly sets up his man again, rejecting the initial screen, then snatching this back to run Iggy into the pick and walk into his bread and butter shot. Paul has always had the ball on a string, and throughout his prime, he was so quick that he could easily split defenders out of pick and roll, leaving two men in the dust at once. Because we all watched Paul torch defenses throughout his 30s on the back of raw skill and intellect, it's too often forgotten that young CP3 was an elite athlete and legitimately one of the quickest players we have ever seen. So it was this complete mastery of every facet of pick and roll offense, the setup, the handle, the shot making, the playmaking, that made Paul one of the two purest pick and roll operators we've ever seen, after only Steve Nash in my eyes. When prime Chris Paul had the ball in his hands, you knew he was going to create a good shot every time down. He's one of the greatest offensive engines ever. Not only did he architect one of the great offensive stretches ever in LA, leading 5 top 5 offenses and back-to-back #1 units, his impact numbers are historically great. Paul posted an offensive on-off rating, which measures how much his team's offense improved with him on the floor compared to off it, in at least the 97th percentile 10 times in his first 15 seasons. For reference, Steph has only hit that mark 8 times, and LeBron has done so 11 times. So that sort of year after year transformation of offenses across different situations nonetheless is all-time great. But for all his offensive brilliance, let's not forget that Paul was also a real plus defender throughout his prime. Despite his small stature, thanks to his aforementioned athleticism, some of the best hands we've ever seen, and phenomenal defensive instincts. Look at him easily stay in front of Tony Parker, one of the quickest guards in the league, then perfectly anticipate the spin move, forcing Parker to lose his balance while he strips the ball with perfect timing. Those hands drove Paul to rack up an absurd 6 steals titles in 7 years. Look at the timing on this strip as Chauncey's coming around the screen, or here on poor KD, who gets beaten to his spot, then tries to cross after regaining his handle. That is ninja precision, but CP3 made it look easy, and was also prolific using those hands to make timely plays as an off-ball defender. As he added strength in his Clippers years, Paul became a more complete defender, even frequently ranking as an efficient post defender with excellent positioning and hands. He was still a 6-foot guard, and I think his 9 all-defense selections overstate his greatness there some, because that is exclusive company, but Paul was a very good defender, arguably the best ever at his size. And although his level dropped off on defense after he left the Clippers at age 32, Paul remained an elite offensive player. In Houston, Paul co-captained a historic #1 offense in 2018, adapting to and excelling in their ISO-heavy scheme as the #3 isolation scorer in basketball, behind just Harden and LeBron, and doing so with 92nd percentile efficiency. In Oklahoma City, Paul improved an island of misfit toys offense by over 13 points per 100 possessions, a 99th percentile mark. In Phoenix, Paul co-captained 2 more top 5 offenses, leaning into an extreme floor general, playmaking first role in the regular season before executing teams with absurd mid-range shot making in the playoffs, dominating even when he basically couldn't get to the rim anymore. That offensive value earned Paul All-NBA selections in the seasons he turned 35, 36, and 37 years old, making him the only guard ever to make 3 All-NBA teams at that age. So, as one of the greatest offensive guards ever, and one of the better defensive guards with elite longevity, Paul's impact on winning is among the greatest players ever. This is pretty easy to see when you look at every stop of CP3's career. He inherited an 18-win Hornets team, improved them by 20 wins as a rookie, and made them a perennial playoff team. The year after he left, along with David West to be fair, they were picking #1 overall. He joined a 32-win Clipper team and made them one of the best offenses we've seen for 6 years. Then they missed the playoffs the year after he left. The Rockets went from a very good team to a 65-win powerhouse by adding Chris Paul. The year they replaced him with Russell Westbrook, mind you, Paul's OKC team that had moved off both Russ and PG-13 and was built off the scrap heap was somehow better than the previous year's OKC team and won as many games as Houston. The year after CP3 left OKC, they embraced the tank and went 22-50. The Suns went from a fun young team outside the playoffs to an NBA finalist in the year they added Chris Paul. Nobody in NBA history has made such a massive, positive impact across so many different situations. And just as his value is made obvious when he joins or leaves a team, you see it in all these stops when he's unavailable. In every spot, save his 38-year-old season in Golden State, the team's winning percentage improves dramatically in games Paul plays compared to when he's injured. Paul has improved his teams by 9.3 points per 100 possessions over his career. That ranks 5th among all players to appear in at least 500 games since the stat began tracking in 1997. Better than legends like Dirk Nowitzki, Tim Duncan, Kevin Durant, and Kobe Bryant, and trailing just Kevin Garnett, Steph Curry, Nikola Jokic, and LeBron James. Since tracking began in 1997, CP3's raw plus-minus total is 4th, behind just Duncan, LeBron, and Dirk. Presuming health, he is all but guaranteed to climb into the top 10 in career wins this season, and his overall career winning percentage equates to a 53-win pace. To sustain that over 19 years on 6 different teams, most of which were in disarray before he joined, is unthinkable. What is Chris Paul if not one of the greatest winners the game has ever seen? He's done everything at the point guard position at an extremely high level and dramatically improved every team he's ever been on who have won a lot. Yet, the narrative persists that he is a loser because of the playoffs. He doesn't have a ring. And to many NBA fans and media members, rings are everything. But how many times has CP3 actually been at fault for his team's playoff defeat? I don't think many people blame the Hornets' lack of deep playoff success on Paul, considering he never had contending talent alongside him there. But it is worth noting that across those years, he averaged 22, 5, and 11 on plus 3.5 relative true shooting percentage in the playoffs. Pretty amazing. But let's look at the Clippers' years more closely. In 2012, LA lost to the Spurs. This is the worst playoff series of Paul's career. He had just re-injured his groin at the end of their first round series against Memphis, a series in which he led a 24-point fourth quarter comeback in game 1 and iced game 4 with 8 overtime points before he got hurt, but he played poorly against the Spurs, no two ways about it. Blake was also banged up, so it was just a shitstorm for LA. In 2013 versus Memphis, Paul averaged 23 points per game on a dazzling 63% true shooting and was particularly excellent in the final 2 games, scoring an efficient 63 combined points. But in those same 2 games, Blake hardly played, seeing just 16 minutes per game after suffering a high ankle sprain. In 2014, Paul played very well against the Thunder, averaging 22.5 points and 12 assists per game on 61% true shooting, but LA fell just short to the 59-win team with MVP Durant and Russ. Now, he did have 2 turnovers in the final minute of Game 5 in this series, which was inexcusable, cost them the game. So we obviously can't overlook that, but it also shouldn't erase that he played very well overall against a great team over the course of 6 games. The 2015 run includes the shot of Chris Paul's career, as he sent the reigning champion Spurs packing in Game 7, while hobbled with an injured hamstring, by the way. And it includes the Clippers' most famous playoff exit, as they squandered a 3-1 lead to Houston. This is a terrible blown series. LA was the more talented team, and they were in clear position to finish it off. But what actually caused the loss? Well, this is how the following key Clippers role players performed over the final 3 games of the series, all losses. JJ Redick, playing 38 minutes per game, shot under 30% from the field and 23% from deep. Matt Barnes, playing 25 minutes per game, shot under 23% from the field and 15% from 3. Jamal Crawford, playing 26 minutes per game and attempting 14 shots per game, shot 29% from the field. Austin Rivers, the last legitimate member of the Clippers rotation, shot 26% from the field and 10% from 3. So the Clippers basically had a 7-man rotation, and those 4 players in the final 3 games shot 27.6% combined. I am not exaggerating when I tell you I cannot think of a worse collective role player performance in NBA history. Paul was excellent offensively over the course of the series and in the last 3 games, over which he averaged 26 points and 10 assists per game on 63% true shooting. Now, LA as a whole did not play well defensively, but there's no argument for giving CP3 the lion's share of the blame there. Paul was bad in the Clippers' Game 6 meltdown, in which they blew a 17-point lead late. His teammates were even worse, shooting 2 of 15 in the fourth quarter, but there's no excusing his performance in that quarter. I am not saying Paul is blameless here, but should this series, in which he mostly played very well and his supporting cast was historically awful and he was coached by Doc Rivers, be the defining moment of his playoff career, the reason so many call him a loser? Paul was bad in a very memorable quarter and really good overall. I think this is a classic example of greatly misattributing a team result to an individual star. Nobody wins when more than half their rotation is making a quarter of their shots. Nobody at all, ever. But hey, it's not flashy to put this series on JJ Redick and Jamal Crawford. So unfairly, CP3 takes way more of the blame than he deserves. Now, here's the rest of his playoff career. In 2016, he and Blake both get hurt and miss the final 2 games of their series against Portland, which LA of course loses. In 2017, he averages 25 points and 10 assists on 59% true shooting, but Blake misses the final 4 games against Utah with a broken toe. In 2018, CP3 helps propel the Rockets to a 3-2 lead over the Kevin Durant Warriors, who just had probably the best season ever before this, and then he misses the last 2 games with a hamstring injury, and they lose. In 2019, Houston again loses to the KD Warriors, still playing them tighter than anybody else ever did when they were healthy. In 2020, Paul averages 21 points per game on 61% true shooting and loses in 7 with a Thunder team that Vegas predicted would win 32 games before the year. They had no business being there if not for CP3. In both 2021 and 2022, Paul greatly increased his scoring volume in the playoffs and was devastatingly efficient overall, playing basically perfect series against Denver and New Orleans, and in the 2021 run delivered a 41-point closeout performance on 81% true shooting against the Clippers to advance to the finals, then averaged 22-8 on 55% from the field and 52% from 3 in the finals, just a couple weeks removed from suffering a shoulder injury, but was ultimately overpowered by more dominant, all-time great forces at the peak of their powers in Giannis Antetokounmpo and Luka Doncic. And obviously, Paul was not good in Game 7 against the Mavs. Not a single Sun was. It was a complete team disaster, and Luka was unstoppable. But overall, it's really amazing how good CP3 was in those runs at that age. He ranks 3rd among all guards ever in terms of playoff points per game after turning 35, having done so on 59% true shooting, trailing just Michael Jordan and Steph Curry, while having played more games than both of them combined in that span. And finally, in 2023, he got hurt against Denver, when he was over the hill anyways, just to rub it in. So, in a vast majority of these series, Paul was awesome. In fact, in his playoff career, he's raised his scoring volume by 2.5 points per game and marginally improved his efficiency, which is rare. He is the only player ever to average at least 20 points and 8 assists per game on 58% true shooting in the playoffs. That bread and butter shot making that nobody can take away, that supreme offensive IQ, it's always translated. Over his playoff career, his teams have also been 6.2 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor, a sizable mark. The man dominated playoff series at 22 and 37 years old. Every other player of this era who is widely maligned for their playoff performance has a consistent track record of dropping off individually in the postseason. James Harden and Joel Embiid, all-time great regular season scorers, consistently regressed in both volume and efficiency in the playoffs. Paul improved in both areas. DeMar DeRozan and Russell Westbrook, who actually gets less playoff flack than CP3, are 2 of the 3 least efficient playoff scorers since 2010 with at least 1,000 attempts. Paul ranks 7th out of those 46 players in true shooting. And there are identifiable reasons for all of this. Harden's lack of shot variety hurt him. Embiid's jump shot and playmaking have both failed him. Both players were dinged, some by relying on foul grifting, which is not rewarded in the more physical playoffs. Westbrook's poor shot selection and awful jump shooting caused him to regress. All of these players struggled with turnovers. They all had clear playoff limitations that contributed greatly to their regression there. But Paul, with his brilliant, controlled playmaking and incredibly versatile shot making, was in many ways built for the playoffs, and the numbers reflect that. But maybe you're still thinking, oh, well, his numbers might look great, but he didn't deliver in the clutch. Well, since tracking began in 1997, Paul has made the 7th most field goals in the fourth quarter and overtime in the playoffs at a ridiculous 51% clip. There are 40 players who have made at least 150 such shots, and out of that group, Paul has the 2nd best field goal percentage, trailing only Shaq. So, the only player to shoot a higher percentage than the 6-foot-tall purported choker is the 7-foot-tall, unstoppable, GOAT-level playoff performer. All of the great perimeter players of the 21st century, all of the dudes who we rave about as being historically clutch, Paul has shot better than in closing time. And how about this? On shots to tie or take the lead in the final 5 minutes of regulation and overtime in the playoffs, out of the 28 players to make at least 15 such shots, Paul ranks 3rd in raw field goal percentage and 1st in effective field goal percentage. Those are the most high-stakes shots on the biggest stage, and Paul has been great at them. In closeout games, Paul averaged 21 points and 8.5 assists per game on 61% true shooting. In elimination games, he averaged 22, 6, and 9 on 58% true shooting. Maybe we repress his great moments, multiple 40 pieces in successful closeout games, a 33-point closeout performance in which he did not miss a shot, a series-winning shot against the reigning champs, because, due to circumstances largely out of his control, they didn't result in a championship. And because we are obsessed with titles, we have to form the narrative after the fact that he was bad. But maybe, just maybe, like everything indicates, Chris Paul has been good in the playoffs. But spent his career in the strongest conference we've ever seen, lost a lot of close series to great teams, had an exceptional amount of horrible injury luck, and in his most maligned playoff exit, he actually played well. But his teammates put forth an all-time disaster class. If it seems like I'm making excuses, tell me what I just said that is not true. Championships matter in basketball. They are the end goal. And there is a tier of all-time unstoppable forces who I truly believe are so great that they would end up with a title basically no matter what in their career. But there's only like maybe 15 of those guys in the course of NBA history, and Chris Paul isn't one of them. But I believe he's actually the best player ever not to win a ring, narrowly beating out Charles Barkley and Karl Malone. I believe he's a top 25 player of all time. I believe he's a top 5 point guard of all time. He's a much more efficient offensive player and a much better defender than Isaiah. Nash's offensive edge is more than offset by Paul's defense in the length of his prime. Kidd's defensive edge is more than offset by the fact that Paul completely laps him as a scorer and offensive engine, and Paul's scoring edge over Stockton, and therefore his ability to actually carry an offense, is massive, while they both excel defensively and as playmakers. Like I said, he's the most complete point guard ever. It is perfectly fine to dislike Chris Paul. I get it. He is prone to doing annoying shit, but distorting reality and denying his greatness is another thing, and unfortunately, it happens a lot. Sometimes you do everything you can, and you catch a bad break in a team sport. We like to act as though the basketball gods are some morally pure, guiding force who will always reward those who are deserving with a championship, but it's not the case. Not to mention, the very human voters can snub you, like you could easily argue happened to Chris Paul with MVP in 2008. He averaged 21 and 12 on plus 4% relative true shooting, was first team all defense, improved the Hornets by 9 points per 100 possessions, and led them to 56 wins. I believe he should have been MVP, but he wasn't rewarded with an MVP award, so it gets overlooked. PR has never been on Paul's side. His own temperament and our conflation of championships with individual performance and impact have created a nice cocktail of hatred for him, as we fail to give him full credit where it's due and overstate or even manufacture his shortcomings. But the man is a basketball genius, the closest thing to a perfect point guard we've seen. And now that he's finally no longer a threat, now that his freakishly long prime has finally given out, and as he goes on to aid the NBA's new golden boy in San Antonio, I hope we can all appreciate the old man before he's gone.